Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 159, Halloween Comics 2015. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, Gene and I, as we have done over the past couple of years, are going to be looking at this year's Halloween offerings. But before we get to those titles, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative podcast is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are going to be anywhere from 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, including October, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Now, sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off, but often the discounts are more impressive than that.
And this month we got a bunch of bundles. We got a Marvel relaunch bundle at 50% off. Two Vertigo bundles. Vertigo bundle number 2 is at 50% off. Vertigo bundle number 1 is at 75% off. Ooh! There's also a October Robin War bundle. I guess DC Comics Robin is going to war somehow. There's a bundle for that for 50% off.
And that's spooky. Robin at war.
That's super spooky. And there's a Marvel and DC Kids bundles. Both of those are at 50% off. There's also a Valiant bundle at 50% off, and DC Polybag Variant bundle at 45% off, and that scares me a lot.
That's right, because you know what that plastic does to the environment.
I know, it's scary.
Yes, but if you want something that's not so scary, something that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, then head over to the website of our sponsor, dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs, scary and otherwise. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the spooky guys with PhDs sent you.
That was sweet.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask you, Gene, never allow me to do that voice again on the podcast.
That's okay. We can fix that in post. Or not.
Oh, this has become an annual tradition, Gene. You and I doing a Halloween show together. We did this the first time back in 2013.
Jeez.
And then we decided to do it again last year. And it is not as if Kunka doesn't want to do this. It's just usually around this time of the year, he's got other things going on. And
he's a fraidy cat.
That's right. Yeah, that was pretty good. And that also reminded me a little bit of Count Chocula.
Yum.
And Count Floyd.
Count Floyd's 3D House of Comics.
But as fate would have it, you and Scaredy Fate, you and I are the ones who do the shows for Halloween. And as we have done over the past couple of years, Gene, we're going to look at some of the seasonal offerings that either have something specifically and explicitly to do with Halloween, such as Halloween special issues, or comics that have a particular horror theme released just in time for Halloween.
And this year there are a whole lot of them.
That's right. So let's go ahead and jump into the titles. Well, Gene, we're going to start with 3 book-length contributions to this year's Halloween fair. And the first one we're going to look at is from a friend of ours and definitely a friend of the podcast, and that is Craig Yo. His 3rd volume of Haunted Horror, that collection that he does, has just now come out.
Yeah, and it's a heaping helping horror.
That's a heaping help of horror. And that's a great way of putting it. Maybe we found the subtitle to this week's show. But for those who are unfamiliar with Haunted Horror, first and foremost, shame on you, because we have talked about it on the podcast quite a number of times. But Haunted Horror is a bi-monthly, or I guess a semi-monthly, a semi-monthly comic that Craig puts out from IDW. And basically what he does is he chooses primarily pre-code horror comics and packages them in kind of large, substantial issues. I can't remember the page count of each individual, but
they're probably 48, 52, something like that. I'm not sure. I don't think they're quite 64, but I think it's a good old late golden age 48 or 52.
Right. And what he started to do, I guess about a year and a half ago, is to release hardcover volumes of the Haunted Horror comics as part of his Chilling Archives of Horror Comics series. And to talk about the thickness of each individual issue of Haunted Horror, 3 issues of Haunted Horror make up each volume, and this is quite a substantive volume. So I'm looking at this latest one that you and I are going to discuss, and you're looking at about 160 pages worth of comic in this nice hardcover form. So that is basically the result of only 3 issues, individual issues of Haunted Horror. So we're up to volume number 3 in the hardcover series, and you know, just as with the other 2, this one definitely does not disappoint.
Yeah, and we should also say, too, it's not just Craig who's editing these. This is edited by Craig Yo, Cletia Gussoni, who, among other things, is a partner in Yale Books because she and Craig are married, and Steve Baines.
Right.
So it's the 3 of them together doing this, and they each have their own horror host alter egos as well, which is pretty cool.
Right. Craig is Forlock the Warlock. Cletia is Madame Cletia, and then there is Mr. Carswell. You know, in the tradition of the old EC comics.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now, you know, along with the old EC comics, even though they do not include any EC comics, these are all pre-code. In fact, the subtitle of Volume 3 is Pre-Code Comics So Good They're Scary.
Which you would kind of hope for. And
yeah.
a lot of them actually don't disappoint in the scary part. Not always, not especially not all old horror stories are as scary as we want them to be, but some of these are genuinely creepy. Like they are like I'm not quite sure what I just read creepy.
Yeah, exactly. And some are creepy, but in a very different way. I mean, they're funny creepy. And
yeah.
I've got some pretty good candidates I'd like to discuss at some point about those. But you know, this is made up of quite a number of individual stories, and some are by creators, specifically artists, whose names we can recognize. And in fact, one of the things that Craig and Klizia have, the other editor, I'm sorry,
Steve.
So one of the things that Craig, Klizia, and Steve have done is to provide the artist on all of the comics that they're including here. And in fact, those are the names that are probably going to be easy to determine, because even if the name of the artist is not listed in the art, and many times it is, they can decide on or determine the artist by the style. The writer is a little more difficult, and in fact, there is a note somewhere here that the editors say if you would like to help, provide more information on some of these comics, if they, for instance, didn't know who the writer is, please get in touch with us. And in fact,
right.
as Craig has mentioned on this show a couple of times, these collections, like Haunted Horror and also his other series, Weird Love,
which I buy faithfully every freaking issue. That's one of my favorite comics out right now.
Oh yeah, that's another great one. And same general format, right? So he'll collect a lot of these older, not necessarily pre-code when it comes to the Weird Love, but a lot of these older comics and into one larger semi-monthly series. But the reason I mention this is that, Craig has told us a couple of times that he relies on the help of others in order to get the original art, in order to find out information about who the actual creators are of the particular comics. And so these series seem very much a collaborative effort.
Oh, yeah, very much so. In fact, even the title page, besides listing the three editors, it mentions their Haunted Horror Horde. Let's try saying that 3 times fast as well. A group of 5 other people who they have relied on in one way or another to put the book together.
Right. Now, how do you want to tackle Haunted Horror Volume 3? There's no way that we can look at every single one of these stories because there's so much for us to look at in this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, there's so much in this podcast, and there are so many stories in this book. Again, each individual issue has probably 6 or 7 stories in it.
Exactly,
because these stories are usually like 5 or 8 page corkers.
Yeah. Well, which ones to you stand out in Haunted Horror?
Oh, the one that absolutely stands out to me more than anyone else is Ghosts from Mars.
Oh, God. That was going to be mine as well.
Yeah, okay. There's a reason for that. This is one of those stories where I just said, what the hell am I reading? And I think we have to spoil it a little bit because there's no way to describe just how weird this story is without talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, this was the leading story in issue number 9 of Haunted Horror, and it was one hell of a way to get the issue going. So how would you explain the premise?
Oh, God. Part of the premise is summed up in the very third panel, the speech balloon. Good heavens, it's raining tiny dead monsters. 'Cause why not? And you've got these tiny dead monsters that are raining down from the sky in what look like plastic bags or like a clear teardrop-shaped membranes. And they're just dead monsters falling all over the place.
Okay, and it's not only dead monsters in these tear-shaped membrane bags or whatever the hell these things are, but they're coming from spaceships.
Oh, of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, let's get serious here for a minute. But again, but the only thing weirder than the tiny dead monsters raining from the skies is our hero, noted scientist and student of spiritualism and stars, Don Blant. Blant. Yes, folks, his name is Don Blant. I don't know where that name comes from. It's intriguing, but not as intriguing as the fact that he gains his spiritual advice from the ghost of his dead brother. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah. This more than any other story in this volume of Haunted Horror just strikes me that, the people who created this, it's like either they were in a room trying to come up with the most ridiculous conditions under which to create a story.
Check.
It's like, what's the weirdest premise that we can come up with? Or they were drunk and or high.
Drunk, probably.
Yeah. because this is really wild stuff. Now, this was originally published in issue number 3 of the comic book Dark Mysteries in late 1951.
The artist Vince Napoli, which I don't recall seeing his name before.
Mm-mm.
The art is not the most spectacular part of the story. I think the writing really does the lion's share of the weirdness here. Although the art's not bad, but it's there's some stories here that are kind of weirder. Although the layout on the last page is kind of insane as well. A lot of little weird round inset panels and stuff like that.
Yeah, that one in the middle of the page toward the bottom, I guess, is round because that's not Mars, is it?
It's unclear.
It's unclear. I mean, if it were Mars, you would think it would be a little reddish color, but it looks more like the moon.
No, it's not. It is the moon.
It is the moon, okay.
We're not going to say why it's the moon, but that is the moon.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll say one other thing that makes the story odd. What's the one thing that starts to save humanity? The fact that the tiny dead monsters are repelled by human blood. So human blood becomes a tool that the world uses to combat the tiny dead monsters.
And so they start spraying blood.
Well, right, yeah.
Because, like you said, why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you create a gigantic cloud of human blood to encircle the Earth? I mean, that only makes sense.
Yeah.
God, I love this story. It's insane.
I mean, there are other great stories in this collection, but compared to Ghosts from Mars, they pale.
Yeah, and again, it's not scary, but it's so weird. It really pays off in the weird thing. And I tell you, as soon as I finished reading the story, the first thing I did was I jumped on Google to find out what other stories Don Blant has been in. Because you know, with a setup like this, a scientist and he's a scientist and a spiritualist who talks to the ghost of his dead brother. They've got to work that, right? I don't think there's ever been another story with Don Blant. And that makes me incredibly sad.
I'm wondering if Don Blant is a prototype of Doctor Strange.
Oh, I don't see that.
Well, I'm just saying this kind of strange blend between the scientific, philosophical, and the otherworldly, and the weirdness. I mean, okay, a lot of people who were on some kind of substance really dug Doctor Strange. Now, I don't know if you need to be on any kind of mind-altering substances to get a kick out of Ghosts from Mars.
No, but one thing, but that does bring up one thing that I noticed throughout the collection. How many of the heroes, and they're almost all heroes, never heroines, they're either professor or doctor. It's always about, the stories are almost always about, the important man somehow. Where it doesn't, I mean, they don't, what they're important for doesn't really matter, but they have to have that title. They're a professor, they're a doctor, they're Baron somebody. I just noticed that a lot as we go through these old stories.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, and on that topic, the story that follows Ghosts from Mars is called Absent-Minded Professor. And that's another one. And I have
we got to talk about this one.
Yes, because it's like right up our alley, I guess.
Yeah.
Of the 3 issues of Haunted Horror, number 7, 8, and 9, that make up this 3rd volume, the hardcover volume of Haunted Horror, I have to say that 9 is the strongest of the 3, just because of the stories that they include. The first of which is Ghosts from Mars, but then there is Absent-Minded Professor and a couple of others that are some of my favorites in this collection. So the thing about Absent-Minded Professor is it begins with a storyteller, and this storyteller is, what is this dude's name? He's cackling, sitting on a cart of skulls. I guess he's the gravedigger. And he says, "So you want to hear a story, eh? One of the terrifying tales of my casebook of evil. Would you like to hear about ghouls or vampires? Or maybe about the swamp men who... Nah, I'll save that story for later. Now I'll tell you a quiet, chuckle, 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 story about the absent-minded professor." And so we get what appears to be kind of a mild-mannered setup of a narrative. So you have this professor at a local college, a small college, who is intelligent, he's humorous, he's personable. All the male students want to be like him and admire him, and of course all of the female students are enamored of him. And there is one of his students, oh God, what is her name? Janice. Janice, who is a little put off by him because he's so popular, and she, thinks that the girls in class, her fellow students, are kind of fawning, and that's not very attractive. And so she becomes a little suspicious of his attractiveness, but then she eventually falls prey to his attraction. And they develop a relationship, and part of his charm is the fact that he is a bit of a klutz. He's clumsy. And in fact, clumsy also becomes a theme elsewhere in this volume of Haunted Horror. We can talk about that as well. But, he is a little absent-minded, a little bit of a klutz. But they fall in love, Janice and the absent-minded professor. And then when they go on their honeymoon up in his mountain cabin, she finds out why he is a little bit of a klutz, or at least what his absent-mindedness has made of him, literally.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun. And I don't know how much I should give away, but let's just say that he's not the man she thinks he is.
No, and she's a bit, well, actually, he's a bit disarmed by what he is. And we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, yeah. See, now, our listeners do not know this story, so they don't get the puns that we're making here. But listeners, just believe us, they're apt and clever puns.
Oh, yeah. Very clever.
Yeah, so that's also one that was originally in issue number 9 of Haunted Horror. But I tell you, one of my favorite, more quote-unquote serious horror stories is one that is probably Klitzia's favorite as well, because her character of Madame Klitzia is the one who actually introduces this volume, and one of the stories that she calls out as one of the best in the collection is Horror Go Round. And in fact, Horror Go Round is the only story in this volume that actually has one of the characters, in this case, Madame Klitzia, introduce it.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in past volumes there were one or two other ones that were introduced by either Forlock or Mr. Carswell, but this is the only one that one of the characters introduces. And I think, now you were talking about earlier stories that are disturbing and genuinely creepy. This is one of those.
Yeah, I just need to find it. Unfortunately, my print copy didn't show up, so I'm working with a PDF.
This is on page. This is on page 135.
Okay, thanks.
And it originally appeared in the comic book Strange Stories from Another World, issue number 2, in August of 1952. Bob McCarty did the art, and Fawcett was the publisher. And that's one of the things I really like that Craig does in all of his collections is, as best as he can, he will give you context, original publication, artist, creator, writer, all of that information.
Yeah, and this is one of the stranger stories. It's got a more of an EC feel to it, I think.
It does.
More classic 50s horror.
Yeah, and even the very first panel, which was basically the first page, when the owner of the Horror Go Round is looking, I mean, he's at the foreground, and he's looking directly at you, the reader, and he's saying, "Only 10 cents a ride. Won't you come aboard?" That's creepy. And we should mention that the Horror Go Round is actually a merry-go-round made up of grotesques. So instead of, as you would find on most merry-go-rounds, horses or unicorns or other kind of animals that people can ride, these are monster-like creatures that are extremely grotesque-looking, even worse than gargoyles. And so basically the story is you have two brothers who are standing outside of this Horror Go Round, and they're commenting on the ugliness of this spectacle. One brother says to the other, "What a grisly idea of entertainment. Those monsters look almost real." And then his brother says, I agree, Robert, but the children don't seem to mind. And then one of them notices that one of the creatures that is a part of the horror go-round seems to resemble someone who died not too long ago, but they kind of, poo-poo that connection.
I'm sure that has no bearing on the rest of the story, though.
Let's just say that at first it's one of the brothers who falls prey to some nefarious force, and it leads the other brother eventually back to the horror go-round, and then that final second brother makes his way, so to speak, to the horror go-round.
Yeah, this
as we see in the very last panel.
Right. Yeah. He's a yeah. Again, don't want to give everything away in these stories. But one moment I really do like in this book in this story, page 139, in that middle tier there, the very last panel is kind of like one of these split panels. And then one day, a certain headline caught Robert Graham's eye, and you've got the newsboy on the corner holding up the newspaper saying "brutal murder revealed," and then a quick cut to a coroner talking to one of the brothers saying, "You want to see the corpse?" There's no farting around here. Yeah. Here's a murder. Do you want to see the corpse? I just love that. That is how that coroner has to talk.
I was about to say, he probably sounds that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of my favorite stories of the collection as well. And again, issue number 9 of Haunted Horror. The story that follows that is one of the two that is reproduced using the original artwork that was donated, or at least the scans were donated to Yo Books. And this one is called Shh. And it originally appeared in Weird Magazine, or Weird Mysteries, number 7 in October of '53. And it's from the original art is from the collection of Dave Odell. And the thing that makes this story so striking is not so much that it's reproduced from the original art, which is really nice, but it's almost completely, not quite, wordless, if you don't count sound effects. And it's funny. I mean, it is the one intentionally almost unironic, humorous contribution in this collection. I mean, there's some irony here, but I mean, it was intended to be funny. It's not funny like Ghosts from Mars that, well, maybe intended to be funny then, but who knows?
Yeah, and one reason I like this one is because again, I love to see original art in the first place, but this one really works because this one really works well in black and white. But a lot of these stories, I don't think would work as well. But this one, it takes place mostly kind of look like in the attic of an old house, and the shadows are just the inky shadows, literally inky shadows here, are so deep and just permeate the pages so much. It looks the pages look really, really good in black and white. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that color would have enhanced these at all. I think for a lot of the other stories, they're all drawn for color one way or another, and the color is better or worse in some different stories. This one works just perfectly in black and white.
Yeah, and Sal Trapani does the pencils with inks by Sal Fiacciato. And this is another one of those stories that looks like it could have come from one of the old EC comics.
Yeah, a little bit. It reminds you of kind of the one the sound effects story from Mad Magazine, even. Mm-hmm. Although the sound effects here aren't nearly as inventive, but they're just they just permeate the pages as well. Yeah,
and again, I mean, I don't want to overemphasize the last several stories in this volume, but following Shh is the story that I referenced earlier, Clumsy.
Oh, right, yeah.
We have a guy here who is, again, a scientist, and when he's not doing his science, he's just a big klutz. And this has one of those strange turns as well. But and now, we've been focusing on a lot of these later stories, the ones that originally appeared in issue number 9 of Haunted Horror, the semi-monthly comic. But there are others in the collection that are just as good.
Yeah, I want to mention one that comes earlier. I'm not sure if good is the right term for this one.
Which one?
The Nameless Terror of Twin Dunes. This starts on page 46.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I love this story is because I'm not sure the person who drew this, it's Bill Fraccio, whose name I don't recognize. I can't tell if he's just never seen a comic before or he's trying really, really inventive, crazy things on the pages that don't quite work, or what's going on, because so many of these pages just look so bizarre, and I can't quite figure out why. It's just weirdness.
And the panel layout makes things a little difficult. And
there's a couple of pages with arrows that, thank God there are arrows there, but I think, like page 48 especially, I think it needs at least one more arrow. Sometimes arrows are kind of a crutch, and in this case, I think they definitely are. But I think page 38 or page 3 of the story could use one more crutch.
Yeah, and the thing about page 48, you're dealing with traditionally shaped or sized panels, right? So you're dealing with the rectangle shape. And so it should, ideally, be easy enough to determine which panel you go to after the previous one.
Yeah, unfortunately, every rectangle is a different shape.
Exactly.
Is a different shape, which means that there's no logical way to move from, once you get to panel 2, it's a little hard to figure out when it's actually panel 3.
Yes, the two columns are staggered and uneven, so you're not exactly sure where to, do you go, down a column, or do you go zigzag over to the next column?
Yeah.
And that's where, the arrows come in handy. But do you also have a bit of that confusion when Fraccio tries to be a little inventive with the kind of panel shapes? Like, for instance, on page 47, there's a panel the shape of a bat's wingspan. And then on page 49, there's a central panel, which I guess it's easy enough to determine because it's more there for mood and effect of the vampire monster with something in its mouth. But then you have on page 51 that hand with a knife through it that almost, not completely, but almost kind of skews the panel layout. But thankfully there is at least, well, actually on that page there are two arrows that tell you which direction to go.
Right. Yeah, like you said the vampire face on page 49. That's not a face we see anywhere else in the story.
Yeah, so
it looks like he's eating the middle of the page because the outline is jagged, and he's got the middle of the page in his mouth.
Right,
just staring at.
That's what it looks like,
and he comes from nowhere, and there's nothing said about this character anywhere that you can tell for sure. And you said and then you go 2 pages more, the hand with the knife in it. Where does that actually come from? It looks cool. It looks odd. And then the very last page with the diamond panel, and just like no panel is square until the last 2. You got 4 really strangely shaped panels before that. Again, I'm fascinated by this story. I don't know that it's good, but I like it because it's so, the storytelling itself the visual storytelling itself is so odd.
Right, exactly. Another story that I really liked, and this begins on page 78, The Unsleeping Dead. Now, this is with art by Lou Cameron. It originally appeared in The Beyond, issue number 23, in November of 1953. And the reason why I really enjoyed this one is this seems very much like something out of a Twilight Zone episode. Well, you could say that for many of these stories,
right,
but this one definitely. Here you have someone who is a filmmaker, and he visits a friend of his who happens to be French, and his friend says that his family has has done work in lens development, and they have developed a lens on a camera that if you show the lens on a dead body, then you can see how that body was killed.
Yeah, I'm not
or
quite
how the
sure,
body died.
I'm not quite sure that optics and the way light actually works makes sense in this story, but we just have to go with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens is, of course, this filmmaker who wants to become famous decides that he'll take this camera, but of course he has to kill his friend first. And he does become famous for a while, but his having killed his friend literally comes back to haunt him.
Exactly, yeah. And one thing I like about the story is that he's a filmmaker, but he's not exactly a filmmaker. He does horror pictures, but he's a budding TV cameraman.
TV, that's right, yeah.
And this kind of shows you like it's a little bit like what TV is like in the 1950s. So these kind of anthology shows and things like that. And before kind of TV was really settled into like what we thought about it, like even in the 60s and 70s. A little more experimental, a little more weirdness, where you could just like have an anthology show of just a different horror story every week, because that's what he's doing. He's not filming a series. He just films a different horror story every week, it looks like.
Right. Well, given the story setup or its initial setting in France, this could have been a direction of, the French New Wave.
It could be.
Who knows? It just took a different turn.
A slightly different turn.
Yeah. This is definitely a great collection. Are there any other stories in Haunted Horror Volume 3 you wanted to point out before we move on?
I think we hit the big ones at this point for me.
Yeah. Any book from Yo Books is worth getting. The Haunted Horror books should be at least at the top of your list. And basically also anything in the Chilling Archives of Horror Comics series.
Yeah, the ones that I have that are always a lot of fun. And again, the good thing about these books also is that they're not recolored, so they're a little patchy sometimes. They don't look like modern comics at all, and that's a good thing.
Exactly, and sometimes even the inks themselves, like the lettering, they're not touched up, and so it's a little difficult to read.
Yeah, but I would much rather read that than like every time that Marvel or DC reprints something that's old and with new shiny colors and glossy paper, and it just winds up looking like crap. It looks better, but it's much worse. This looks worse, but it's much better.
Exactly. Now, I mentioned that this is part of the Chilling Archives of Horror Comics, and later this year, there are going to be not one, not two, but 4 new volumes of the Chilling Archives series that are going to be coming out. And I think all of them later this year. One will be Ghosts and Girls of Fiction House, and then the other, The Complete Voodoo, Volume 1, Horror by Heck, and then Devil Tales.
Yeah, those should all be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. And I think when all of those are out, we're going to have Craig back on the podcast to talk with him.
Nice.
Yep. It's always great to have Craig around because he's fun to talk to, and he's got a wonderful, weird sense of humor.
This is true.
Well, you want to move on to that next title that we're discussing. This one's Upside Down, Volume 2, or Book 2, A Hatful of Spells. And this is written and illustrated by Jess Smart Smiley.
Yeah, and this is coming from Top Shelf Productions.
Right.
It's a book for younger readers. It's Volume 2 it's Book 2 of the Upside Down series. And I have to confess that I have not read Book 1, and I was a little lost a couple times. I mean, it's a kid's book, and they do a pretty good job of bringing you up to speed, but sometimes that up to speed comes a little more slowly than I might have liked, because there are some character relationships that it was a little hard to figure out, like, how they were related, or like what this character's motivations necessarily might have been at first. Eventually you get through it, you understand it, but a lot is kind of assumed, I think, that you've read the first volume.
Exactly. Now, the first book, Upside Down, came out from Top Shelf, I think back in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And like you, I'm not familiar with that first one. And, this is going to be something that we're going to be mentioning with some of these other titles as well, that with these Halloween offerings, or maybe in this case it's not specifically a Halloween book, but it came out right at the season, so we can call it a seasonal offering. They're based on series or at least titles that are ongoing that we may not be familiar with. And so, like Gene said, in reading Upside Down, by the time I got to the end of the book, and it's a fairly quick read. This is definitely for younger readers.
It's a 200-page book, but yeah, it's a pretty quick read.
Yeah, and so it took me a while to get my sea legs, so to speak, getting into this because I didn't read the first book. But then once you get into it, and then definitely by the end, you get a sense of what's going on here.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say, Derek, is that even before we start talking about the story, I really like how this book looks. It's a very bold style. It's black and white and kind of not quite bright green. Those are the only 3 colors through the whole book, so it's got a very limited palette. And the style is a little reminiscent of somebody like James Kochalka, a little bit.
I was just thinking that myself. Yes.
Yeah, because the brush marks are pretty bold and simple and straightforward, but it's very clear, and there's a lot of fun like kind of acting from the characters. Lots of nice little tidbits here and there. The use of the 3 colors is really, really inventive, I thought, and it really helps move. Even the dialogue scenes are always interesting to look at because of the way that the colors are kind of manipulated as you go through.
Exactly. And in fact, it's that lime green that really does it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, basically the premise of this story is that the main character, who is a vampire by the name of Harold, he is having a series of nightmares, and they're causing him to lose sleep and also to disturb those that, he sleeps around, his family members. And the fact that he has nightmares is linked to something that happened in, I guess, the first book, his interactions with a witch by the name of Vermilion. And so he keeps having these nightmares where he's thinking that she's going to come back, or that there's something about him that is going to come back and haunt him, or something about her, Vermilion, that's going to come back and haunt him, Harold. So now it's kind of a strange setup, but I guess this is established in this first book. So Harold lives with and they're vampires. Cute vampires, but vampires. And he lives with his mother and father, and also with several bats, cute bats, and bat frogs, or vampire frogs, I guess, is what they are. But all of them together, Harold, his family, the bats, and the vampire frogs live in this, it looks like almost a toy house, like a doll house, and that's where they sleep, inside of the house of Professor Adams and his wife, Mrs. Adams.
Yeah, and it was not quite sure exactly how that happened. I'm sure that was probably the setup of the first book.
Right.
Was to try to how these these very different families kind of wind up living in the same place.
Yeah, but the Addams family, so to speak, are very friendly with Harold and the other vampires. And what they figure out is what's probably causing Harold's nightmares are the witches' hats that are left around town. And apparently the witches are gone, but their hats have remained. And I guess, from what I can gather, all of their hats have one remaining spell. And once the wearer puts it on, that hat impels the wearer to perform that last spell. And then after that spell is performed, then the hat disappears. But you don't know if that last spell coming from the hat, the hat is causing its wearer to do, is going to be destructive or not. Because sometimes they seem relatively harmless spells, like destroying a tree. That's harmful to the tree, but it's not. It's not like creating a monster that then is going to level the entire city. But at one point, Mrs. Adams puts on a hat and cannot take off the hat. And that is basically the motherlode hat, because it has a very powerful spell in it that has some devastating effects. And from what I gather, that seemed to be Vermilion's hat.
I believe so. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's again. Unfortunately, we read so much for this podcast. And this was the first story that I read. I don't remember a whole lot of the specifics of the story.
Yeah.
But again, I like how it looks, and I can see it being a lot of fun. It's kind of episodic in what we have, because there's almost the quest motif with all that we've got to run up the different hats. What's each hat going to do, and things like that.
Right. But this is definitely a fun read. This is something that I think if you wanted to get your child for Halloween, then it would be the perfect reading material for the season. Right.
Especially if you can find Volume 1 as well.
Yeah. So I thought that this was pretty good. I don't think that there's anyone in my household who is young enough to really appreciate this. But so I wouldn't go out and get it, but it definitely is worth reading.
Yeah, and it does end on a sort of a little cliffhanger thing, which I'm sure leads us into Volume 3.
Right. So I would assume there is going to be a volume 3.
Yes.
Now, the third book that Gene and I are going to be discussing on our Halloween show, because the rest are single-issue comic books, but the third book is called Monster Junkies, An American Family Odyssey. And this one is by Eric Shine and Teresa Gates, coming out from Red Anvil. And I was not familiar with Red Anvil before I saw this. And I think, Gene, if I'm not mistaken, I discovered this because I think we got a publicity email from Red Anvil about this, and that's how I discovered it.
Okay.
And so I knew nothing about Monster Junkies before. I'd never heard of the title, but then when I did a little research, I found out that Monster Junkies is actually a prose novel series for young readers. And series, I think there may be maybe 2 titles in the series so far. And as we find in this graphic novel, from what I can gather in the books, the prose young adult novels, it's very similar in terms of tone. So you have a family, and their name is Monster Junkies, and that's a Germanic name that it's not spelled well. For this title, it is Monster Junkies. 2 words that actually you put them together, so that's the family name. But it actually is kind of a bastardization of I think a Germanic or a Slavic.
Isn't just Monster Jung?
Oh, is that what the family's original name was?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so it was Germanic. So it was Monster Jung?
I believe so, yeah. I think I've got it in my notes somewhere, but I'm not going to remember which page it was exactly where they say that.
Yeah, but that's what the family's called now. Living in, I think they live in New England, don't they? In Maine?
I believe so. I don't remember specifically.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a monster family, very much like the Munsters or the Addams Family. Now, the Monster Junkie family, they're not monsters themselves. The main character is the young son whose name is Cromwell, but he prefers to go by Crow. And then his sister is named Indigo, and I guess because of the color of her hair. Their mother, Pandora, and then the father, who is like this archaeologist, someone who goes out and discovers endangered animals, or considered monsters by most, and he brings them when he can back to his home, and then cares for them and provides for them, but keeps them out of the sight of others who would do them harm. And so this tells you part of the message here. Now, the Monster Junkie family, and then the monsters, the creatures that the father brings back to the house, are really not monsters. They're just seen as different from others. And because they stand out, they seem to be monsters, but the underlying message here is, they're just different, and accepting who you are and embracing difference both in yourself and in others is a positive thing. This definitely has a upbeat message like that.
Yeah, and it's clearly the message is not incidental. I think the message is part and parcel of the stories themselves. You read the author's bios in the back. And it makes that pretty clear that they've done some research on this kind of thing, and yeah, the big thing is that the monsters, and we've seen this in like stories from people like Clive Barker and stuff like that as well. The real monsters are other human beings, much more so than the things that look like monsters. Just because something looks different and monstrous, that doesn't mean it's a monster. That just means it's not like you. But sometimes the scariest things are the people that seem to be just like you, but deep down there's something different.
Exactly, and I think that is the journey that the protagonist, Crow, makes as he progresses from the very beginning of this book to the end. Because by the time we get to the end of the book, and I'm not giving away anything here, I mean, he seems to accept the way he and his family and his household are. And he's no longer – it's not that he's really ashamed of who he is, but he just feels a little out of place. But by the time we get to the end of the story, he has gained quite a bit of confidence about who he is and his relationship with others.
Yeah, he's uncomfortable in his own skin at the beginning, most definitely.
Right. And, this is another title for younger readers. Maybe an older reader than Upside Down, Hatful of Spells.
Right.
But, it does have an uplifting message. I can see this being a book that is used, I don't know, maybe you can find in libraries or support groups would rely on this book to maybe help some members through troubling times.
Yeah, it seems like I'm not sure that it's going to appeal to everybody, but there are some people that I think are going to need to read this book, or when they find it, they're going to see a lot of themselves in it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't think that this is a didactic tale, but I would use the word therapeutic.
Yeah. And we should also mention that you said that the book was by those two people at the beginning. It's based on their stories, but it's actually done by a studio. The comic itself is, again, these PDF is so slow on me. But it's done by the J Photo Studios, which is a strange thing. So we don't really know who actually drew it or who actually wrote it.
Yeah, you're right. The two names, the Shine and Gates. Now, on the cover of the book, it says Eric Shine's Monster Junkies, and so I guess he is the original creator, but I guess he's assisted by Teresa Gates, and she is, I think, a psychologist. Yeah, she's a licensed psychologist, scriptwriter, master editor, and so I think that's where she comes in.
Yeah, and one interesting thing I noticed on the cover is that you said, as you said, it's Eric Shine's The Monster Junkies, and if you look at Eric Shine's, they're really pushing the Disney thing here. That because the font that his name is written in, that's Walt Disney's handwriting right there.
Right.
Which is a kind of interesting marketing tool, I think. They're not saying it's a Disney story, but you look at that, there's a subliminal message there that it's kind of a Disney family-friendly sort of thing.
Yeah. And even though this is a completely different Mickey, if you look at the end of the book with both Shine and Gates' bio information, it says that Eric Shine is also author of a children's book called The Forgotten Ornament, which is a Christmas classic, and was endorsed by Hollywood legends Mickey and Jan Rooney.
Yeah, so it's a different sort of Mickey.
Yes, it's a different Mickey. One that, people nonetheless think of as cute. So this is one that if you have young readers, I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, and it does have it does have the seasonal tie-in. It starts off with painting monster models and stuff like that as well. So there's definitely an audience of kids, I think, that would be interested in this.
Mm-hmm.
Man, you know that house up at the end of the road that nobody goes near? Well, let me tell you why they don't. Well, in the haunted house at the top of the hill, the spooks give around to test their skill. That stroke of 12 every night, the scene is such a frightful sight. Stay away when they go.
Well, Gene, let's move on to the next series of titles that we're going to be looking at. And there are three here that I think we've decided to look at together. And all of them are definitely seasonal. They're Halloween related. The first one is The Goon Theater Bazaar. Then there's Adventure Time 2015 Spooktacular. And then SpongeBob Comics number 49, which came out just in time for Halloween. So, in starting with The Goon and Theater Bazaar, the creators are Eric Powell, of course, and John Dunavant, coming out from Dark Horse Comics. How familiar are you with The Goon?
I've read a couple of stories. That's about it.
Okay. Now, this, as well as the other two titles we're discussing in this segment, SpongeBob and Adventure Time, all three of these, to some degree, require a previous knowledge of the title.
This one possibly less than the others.
I agree. That's what I was going to ask. Because if you said you only read, let's say, maybe a couple of Goon comics, I used to read Goon on a regular basis, but I haven't in a few years, and so I've lost track of, let's say, the ongoing storylines of the Goon comics. But I do love Goon. So picking up the Theater Bazaar and finding the various characters, it took me no time to get back into the title, to the series.
Yeah, we've got kind of our three main characters who start off in a car, and it only takes a couple of pages to really kind of get a sense of who these people are. So that it wasn't really a challenge to try to figure out what the relationships are. It's pretty straightforward. You've got the goon, who's a goon. You've got the kind of an interesting semi-bratty little boy, and the kind of the weird best friend who's always up to getting into hijinks.
Oh, right, his friend the Carney, yeah. So they're with a caravan making their way on All Hallows Eve to the next gig, and then their car gets lost in the fog, and they end up at a place that looks like this other carnival, maybe a competing carnival, and they see that this one is called Theater Bazaar. And they're greeted by this really creepy-looking clown figure that says to them, "Step this way, get your tickets for Theater Bazaar." And then they realize at first they said, no, we're not going to do this, but then they, the kid who was with them is wanting to, get some treats there. So he asks the Goon, he said, can we go in, Mr. Goon? Can we? And Goon says, I don't know, kid. And then, of course, his buddy. And what is his buddy's name? I cannot remember.
I don't recall.
Oh, the guy with the eyes. Yeah, I should know this. But he looks and he sees that there is a part of Frankie. Yeah, Frankie. And then Frankie looks to see that there's a place at the Theater Bazaar, girls, girls, girls. And then he convinces Goon that they got to go in. And then when Goon realizes that they have beer there, he says, okay, let's go. And what we find is that there is someone, and I don't remember reading her in past Goon titles, but what is her name?
Roxy Delight.
The Roxy, yeah, the Queen of the Cooch. She's playing the role of the Queen of the Cooch in the Theater Bazaar, and she basically is told by what looks like a fortune-telling machine that she has to basically get someone to take her place as Queen of the Cooch. And once she does, then her ties to the Theater Bazaar are severed and she can go on and live her life. And this is where Frankie comes in. Frankie is such a sucker, when it comes to a variety of things, including, women. And she tries to convince him to become Queen of the Cooch. And we won't say what happens.
She convinces him in not quite so many words, possibly, but it's interesting. And again, the idea of the theater, it's the creation of Zombo, one of the ancient evil spirits of the world.
Who's a clown.
Who's the Death's Head clown.
Right. And so, yeah, it was Zombo that was the big draw of this title for me. Well, that and Roxy Delight, but...
Right. Had you heard of Zombo before?
No, I hadn't.
But the cover, it does say Zombo. Who is he? What is he?
Right. And so, if you weren't drawn to the cover by Roxy Delight's figure, then it was Zombo that got you into Theater Bazaar.
Yeah, and the cover also says it's a The Lords of Misery prelude. So I guess this is leading into something bigger for the Goon at some point. Although the story is definitely self-contained. It doesn't. Again, you don't think you need to know much about these characters at all to get into it, and you get a full story at the end of it as well. So even if it's a prelude to something, you don't feel cheated. It's like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen next, because you get a full story with it.
Exactly, and I tell you, Gene, of all of the single issues that we're looking at for this Halloween episode, the ones that are, let's say, the entire issue is just one story. I'm not counting those that are collections of individual, short pieces. This, I think, is the most successful.
Oh, I think so, definitely.
Okay, I'm a little predisposed because I really like the Goon, even though I haven't read the Goon in years. But, I like the characters. They're fun characters. And you're right. You do get a done-in-one story in Goon Theater Bazaar.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is definitely one of the highlights of the seasonal titles. Now, another one that I think, for me at least, had a lot of promise, but I have to say I was a little lost in it, and that is Adventure Time 2015 Spooktacular. And, I've seen several episodes, not all by any stretch, but I've seen several episodes of Adventure Time. We've talked about Adventure Time on the podcast before. I've read, I think, the first 2, maybe 3 volumes of the Adventure Time comic from Kaboom. Have you read any of the Adventure Time comics?
Okay, I have never read an Adventure Time comic, and I've never seen an episode of the show.
Okay, so you came into this completely cold.
Yeah, well, I've seen the internet memes. I know the names of a couple of the characters who unfortunately don't show up in this story at all. So yeah, this is a completely different experience for me. I had no idea what was going on when I got into it.
Yeah. Now, I'm familiar with some, not all, of, the Adventure Time world. And I knew that the main character we see here is Marceline. But I have to tell you, even knowing what I do, I was a little lost. And I'm guessing that what happens in Adventure Time 2015 Spooktacular is part of an ongoing storyline. In other words, that what Marceline was undergoing previous to this Halloween issue set up what happens here, and then there's going to be more to this story afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Even our very first panel. Well, this is it, Schwabble. The last place I saw Simon.
Right. Yeah, and Schwabble, and I didn't know who Schwabble was, and so I guess for avid readers of Adventure Time, they can take me to task. That's probably an ongoing character. I guess it's a dog. Mm-hmm. It's Marceline's dog or companion, as sometime called Schwab, sometime called Schwabble. So yeah, even at that very first panel, there's the suggestion that there was a story before this, and then by the time we get to the end of the issue, you get a sense that there's going to be a follow-up of some way. And I think it's a good enough story. Again, I felt lost because I didn't know anything prelude to this or previous to this issue. But this raises a larger question, and I think we discussed this to some degree last year in our Halloween show, and that is when it comes to a special seasonal issue, whether it be, a special Halloween issue or a special Christmas or Thanksgiving or, July 4th, whatever, and different comics do different things. You can say the same thing with annuals to some degree as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How enmeshed in an ongoing storyline should that seasonal special issue be, or should that special seasonal issue stand on its own, kind of like the Goon Theater Bazaar, in a way that is something like a done-in-one story that could be an effective way of capturing a new reader?
Yeah, and again, I'm a little uncomfortable saying should, just because everything has its own kind of internal rules and stuff like that. But again, this does sell itself as it's a number 1, whereas Goon is actually number 53 or something. It was kind of hidden inside, although it kind of looks like a standalone thing. This looks like it's a number 1 thing, but clearly it relies on something that's come before.
Right.
I'm not sure who's going to buy this if they're not already an Adventure Time fan. So I'm not quite sure that the idea of needing to have a complete, very clear introduction to all the characters is necessary, but I wouldn't have minded like a 1-page here's what's come before.
Well, exactly.
For myself.
Okay, well, I'll tell you who could possibly buy this if not an ongoing reader of Adventure Time comics. Let's say a parent walking into a comic shop and wanting to get something for their daughter or son for Halloween.
That's also true.
And seeing that, it is a Halloween seasonal comic, I'm going to get this because, at least to my mind, there shouldn't be an expectation that a special seasonal comic is going to need the context of, the larger narrative world of that particular title. Although that seems to be the case with Adventure Time. So It's I don't know. I think readers of Adventure Time will get more out of this than you and I did. Regular readers.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And the other thing that I think too is that I think younger readers aren't quite as hung up as we are on the whole continuity thing. I remember when I was a kid, when I would read something like if I like the first issue of Spider-Man that I got, even though those were tried to be very clearly done in one stories. At the same time, they relied on so much other stuff. And I didn't understand everything that was going on, but I was fascinated that I didn't know what was going on, and it made me want to it made me want to buy more Spider-Man comics so we could figure out what the hell this story was all about. And I'm wondering if that works the same way for something like this.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you in terms of the continuity issue, but the thing about this issue of Adventure Time, the 2015 Spooktacular, is that it's not only part of the ongoing overall Adventure Time...
Right, it's a number one. It's meant to stand alone, seemingly.
It's part of a specific storyline, because there's more, there are different things going on in Adventure Time, but apparently there is a storyline right now, I guess, with Marceline that this is a part of, and if we didn't know what happened before this, that's the reason why we're lost with this issue. Again, I like the art, I like the story well enough, but I don't feel I can really enjoy it or even appreciate it much because I didn't know what happened before.
Yeah, it does assume a lot, but again, yeah, I also really, really like the art in here. It's cartoony. It's a little scratchier than I think I'm used to in a lot of kids' comics. It doesn't look quite as like a slick and finish as some things do, but I think that's to its credit. It kind of gives you a sense of place and a little kind of it's a little grungy and gritty.
Well, that's
in a cute way.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the Adventure Time style. I mean, that's what you'll find on both the cartoon and in the comic.
Okay, that shows you how little I know about Adventure Time.
So yeah, I think that if you're into Adventure Time comics, you're going to get a lot out of this. If not, then you may be a little lost, like me and Gene, or like Gene and I.
Old men.
Yes. But I tell you, another seasonal comic that didn't have us lost, in fact, had us very engaged, is SpongeBob Comics number 49.
Yeah. As I told you yesterday when we were talking about what we're going to talk about today, I have never watched an episode of SpongeBob in my life.
You never?
I've never seen SpongeBob, no.
Oh, my God.
I know that it exists. I know it's good. I know I would like it. I just never got around to it. But I buy a lot of the SpongeBob comics because Chris Duffy, the editor, draws from an amazing talent pool. And the little bit that I do know about SpongeBob, you generally don't need to know a lot of continuity stuff like that. It's pretty clear. The setups are generally pretty straightforward, even when they go really fanciful. The core of the characters is pretty clear. Mm-hmm. And I read it because of the variety. I mean, every issue, at least the ones that I buy, tend to be more of the anthology issues. And you get a handful of stories by great creators in wildly different styles doing crazy stuff.
Right. Just like this is from Bongo Comics. Now, the other big Bongo comic, of course, is The Simpsons, and it's very similar in that, each issue is made up of these short, episodic stories. And it works really well with both The Simpsons and SpongeBob because the cartoons themselves, The Simpsons and especially SpongeBob are, the SpongeBob SquarePants cartoons are like 2 or 3 different stories within an episode. And actually, I have quite frequently watched SpongeBob, not in a while, but especially when my kids were younger, I used to watch them much more regularly. But I could still, right now, if an episode was on, I would gladly watch it and really enjoy it because I think they're well-made, they're fun comics. They remind me of comics that are well-made with interesting, fun stories like, older comics used to be or cartoons used to be. And so you have something similar going on with the SpongeBob comics. Now, you had mentioned interesting creators. One of the things that stands out with SpongeBob comics is that you get a lot of creators that you would think would work within this genre of writing and art. So, for instance, in this issue, we have art by and also writing by Kaz, by Tony Millionaire, by James Kochalka. And so there are a lot of, you wouldn't call them underground, but maybe alternative or indie creators.
Right.
And I think this is largely due to the fact that Chris Duffy is the editor of SpongeBob Comics.
Oh, right, yeah, and he's been doing those kind of like fairy tale and folklore comics through. Is it First Second?
First Second, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, just last week, Gwen and I did a publisher spotlight on the fall issue or the fall releases of First Second, and Fable Comics was one of those that Chris Duffy edited. And of course, he has a wide variety of artists on those. And so it's the same kind of artists who are doing this, the SpongeBob comics.
Right, yeah. And again, Chris Duffy, if you're a slightly younger reader or you had younger kids 10, 15 years ago, Chris Duffy also edited the comic section of Nickelodeon magazine back in the day, which was one of the best comics, one of the best monthly comics things I had read. In fact, there was one year, it was like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, where they released like an annual. Like, here's like the best of the comics that were in the past year. And I thought that actually should have won an Eisner. It was just it was such a really strong collection of comics. It was one of the best anthologies I had read that year by far.
And what year did that come out?
I want to say 10 or 15 years ago. I don't remember offhand, and unfortunately my copy of the book is halfway across the country. So I cannot check.
Yeah. Well, now the first story in this issue, and all of the stories have something to do with horror, or there's something horrific, and in other words, perfect for the Halloween season. The first story, which is actually one of the, maybe it's the longest of this issue, is called Patty Thing. And with only one slight variation, the art looks, fairly straightforward, SpongeBob-ish, right?
Yeah, Derek Dryman doing the
layouts.
The layouts, and Greg Schigiel?
Schigiel.
I'm sorry I'm mispronouncing the name, doing the pencils and the inks. And yeah,
right.
It has a very clear kind of a slightly exaggerated, but very kind of cartoon animation style.
Well, it looks exactly like the cartoon. Yeah. But the one variation of this story, Patty Thing, is quite significant.
Right. Yeah. And again, if a Halloween story called Patty Thing makes you think of Swamp Thing, that's not a mistake. They're banking on that, and because there is a character, or there seems to be a character who seems to be made out of leftover Krabby Patties.
Yeah.
And that character is drawn, and only that character is drawn by Stephen R. Bissett, who many people will know from his long run on Swamp Thing.
Exactly. And, even if you didn't look at the names of the creators at the very beginning of the story, and you're reading through Patty Thing, you would notice that the monster itself, this Krabby Patty created monster, it seems, the art is very different from every other thing around it. It does stand out.
Oh yeah, it doesn't have the clear black line around it like the regular animation style art does. It's kind of foggy. It's very kind of lumpy, and it looks literally like it's come from a different story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clearly other dimensional intrusion into the world of SpongeBob SquarePants, which is exactly how the story plays out. So it makes perfect sense that it looks weird. It's not a sense that the two art styles don't mesh for something. They're not supposed to mesh because this monster is monsters. This monsters is the other that they're trying to understand and come to terms with.
Right.
And who better to draw the other that you need to come to terms with than Steve Bissett, editor of Taboo, the amazing horror anthology Taboo, and all this other stuff like that. He's the one person to draw this in this way.
Exactly. So that's a really fun story. And then following that is a one-page from James Kochalka. And if you take SpongeBob and combine it with James Kochalka, then you have what we see on this one page. So both it looks like two different stories, although they seem to be almost one, I guess. But they seem to be divided into two because the way that things are laid out. It says SpongeBob Funnies by Kachalka, and there's a 4-panel top half of that page with what seems to be a title running down the right or the left-hand margin, Made in the Shade. And then the bottom 4 panels, Pandora's Tie Box. But in both of them, Patrick has this box that becomes the center of the action, so to speak, in this one-page strip or strips. But you get a cute SpongeBob, you get a cute Patrick, and you could say, well, isn't Patrick and SpongeBob, aren't they already cute in the cartoon? Well, of course they are, but they become even cuter in the hands of James Kachalka.
Yeah, and he's in. I'm not sure if he's in every single issue, but I think he's been in every issue that I've read. In fact, I saw him talk a few years ago at New York Comic Con, and I think he had said that when he started, I don't think he had actually ever seen SpongeBob either. They just kind of gave him some notes, and then he just kind of drew whatever he wanted to. I'm not. It might still be that way. But like you said, the layout of this is a little strange because it looks like 2 different strips, sort of. But for me, it's all one story. But like each 4 panels are kind of glossed. It's kind of like old adventure strips, like
right,
where like every day's installment would have a different title up at the top, and that's kind of how this works for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are really fun. The other story, and I think all of them in this issue are really good, but the other one that really stands out, probably for you as well, is Monster Canyon. And this is written by Kaz with art by Tony Millionaire.
Yeah. There's not as much drinking and swearing in this as in a typical Tony Millionaire comic.
Yeah, this is not Maki's.
And it's not quite as underworldly as Kaz, but you can definitely see the Kaz influence in the writing as well.
That reminds me, there is a Underworld collection that's going to be coming out soon from Fantagraphics.
Oh, like a big omnibus thing?
Yeah, a big collection.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait for that. So, yeah, if you're not familiar with the work of Kaz, that's something to check out. But, if you're not familiar with Kaz, then you're probably not familiar with Tony Millionaire, because I think both of them have similar sensibilities. I think Tony Millionaire a little more prolific than Kaz, or at least you see him more.
Right.
And, the setup for this story is that, we're back at the Krabby Patty, and they get a delivery for a place called Monster Canyon, and they don't want to send, or that Squidward doesn't want to go, because they've sent delivery people out there in the past, and they never come back. But, SpongeBob says, oh, I'm going on a break. I'll do it. His carefree SpongeBobiness. But this is SpongeBob. We mentioned that SpongeBob, written by James Kachalka, is very effective. SpongeBob, written by or drawn by Tony Millionaire, is equally effective. I mean, this is this looks like a Maki's comic with SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Without the swearing and drinking.
Right.
Without Uncle Gabby. Yeah.
Right, but with definitely some weird stuff happening. When SpongeBob makes his monster face, that's a weird thing.
Are you talking about when he takes his eyes and shows them in his mouth?
Yeah, sometimes the sheer bliss of it is so strong I have to suck my eyeballs into my head and peek through my mouth.
Yeah, that's disturbing.
It looks even weirder than that sounds.
So, yeah, that's definitely a fun story. And in fact, this is probably one of the most enjoyable single issues. I mentioned earlier that The Goon as a longer story, like a done-in-one, is probably the most successful of the single issues, the seasonal single issues. The thing with SpongeBob, it's made up of a variety of stories, and sometimes not even stories. I mean, I'm looking right now at the Richard Sala illustration that is basically pirates, skeletons sitting around enjoying a Krabby Patty, or at least they're at the Krabby Patty. And of course, all of the characters, the skulls, the skeletons, and the pirates, they look like Sala characters.
Right, and just the page before that, it's a one-page gag with the SpongeBob and Patrick. Is there something on my face? And, of course, there's a million things on his face crawling through his spongy holes. That one's drawn by Andrew Tsurumi. who does a lot of great mini comics and a lot of other longer stuff as well, and it's suitably Halloween creepy.
Yeah,
there's lots of cool monsters all the way through this story. Those are creepy. The ones that Tony Millionaire draws, and I think Kaz even laid that story out, if I'm not mistaken. I think Kaz laid it out and Tony drew it. There's a lot of weird looking creatures in that story as well. So you definitely get your monster bang for your buck in this story, in this book.
Yeah. And, I think that, this issue, as well as some of the other SpongeBob ones that I've seen, it really speaks well of Chris Duffy as the editor. I mean, he's able to bring all of these different creators, widely, divergently different, together. So this is not just the kind of a comic that you can get for your kid, but it's something that adults could definitely enjoy.
Oh, I think so.
And like you said, you get this every now and again.
Yeah. Yeah, when it's got somebody in it that I know, or just I love the theme or whatever, I don't buy every single issue, but I buy most of them. More than I would have thought for a TV show that I've never watched.
Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde. Yeah, well, I look like a woman, but I guess it ain't true. My personality splits in two. Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde.
Well, let's look at two other titles that are not technically Halloween titles, but they've come out just in time for Halloween, and they have everything to do with horror. And in fact, the publisher of both, and that is 215 Inc., have kind of billed them as Halloween-type comics. One is issue number 2 of Elder House, and this is written by Drew Matthews with art by Carlos Trigo. And then the other is issue number 5 of All Hallows Eve, written by Ty Thomas Luckman, adapted by Trevor Luckman. So as we discussed last year when we discussed issue number 1 of All Hallows Eve, I guess that Ty wrote the general story, Trevor adapted it, and then Dave Mims does the art. So now let's start with All Hallows Eve, because we did discuss issue number 1 on last year's Halloween episode, and we didn't know it at the time, but All Hallows Eve is basically an episodic comic where each issue is primarily one, sometimes more than one, kind of eerie story that is, for all practical purposes, done in one. Now, there is a loose connection among all of the issues, because I've read some of the... I don't know if you've read all of the others.
I haven't.
Yeah. But they're very similar in nature. And so basically, I mean, how would you describe All Hallows Eve?
It's from the two that I know, it's kind of an anthology. It's a little Twilight Zone-ish. If Twilight Zone basically just did horror,
right?
So it's not exactly Twilight Zone. It's not exactly Outer Limits. It's its own thing, but it's a horror anthology basically.
Yeah, and in fact, I think every issue has what looks like the exact same page. I guess they keep reproducing it. That basically sets the context. And this is one of the first page. I think this is the first page after the copyright. It says,
right.
For centuries, Halloween has been a night of gatherings and feast for most, an evening of fun and lighthearted tales, a holiday for children, treats and mischief. But before there was a Halloween, there was a harvest. The ancient people would delight in their bounty of nature, understanding that what now has been forgotten. On this night above all others, the thin veil between worlds is broken, and the devil in all forms of wickedness was given All Hallows Eve to collect souls for the underworld. On this Halloween night, we follow evil. And in each of these stories, there is some of that evil that makes its way into our world. And they seem to progress somewhat, or I guess for the most part, chronologically, because the first issue of All Hallows Eve took place in, I can't remember if it was the 1760s or the 1780s, but around that time. It's pre-revolutionary America. And this most recent issue, number 5, takes place in Anoka, Minnesota, Halloween 1951.
Right. Yeah, right. It if it didn't say 1951 at the beginning, I'm not sure that I would have actually picked that up from the storytelling, because there's not a lot of 50s-ish, not a lot of period detail in it, I don't think.
No, you could probably say 20th century, but other than that, I mean, it could be something that could be taking place today for all we know.
Except for the car radio. Other than that, it really doesn't look very. And her the female lead character's hairstyle is kind of 1950s.
Right.
But beyond that, the story is kind of not necessarily timeless, but it looks it could be taking place today.
Mm-hmm. And this seems to be a more violent issue than the previous ones, from what I remember.
Yeah, it's the ending especially is pretty gruesome. If you're looking for your hack slash bloody Halloween comic, this is the one for you.
Yes, with the emphasis on the word hack.
Right.
Because you have a hacksaw.
Yeah, I meant to do that.
Well, you could have been making reference to Tim Seeley's Hack Slash.
I would if I knew what that was.
Oh, really? You haven't read an issue of Hack Slash?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay. Well, this is definitely not Hack Slash, but there's a lot of hacking. So there's this one. So this is by 215 Inc., as is issue number 2 of Elder House. Now, did you read issue 1 of Elder House?
I did, because there are only 2 of them, and it turns out that this is all there is. It's a 2-issue series. It's a 2-issue micro series, I guess Marvel would have called it back in the day. Yeah, and it kind of feels like a screenplay to a certain extent, because it's a pretty straightforward story that I could see working possibly as a movie. Although the ending really felt, I'm not sure if rushed is the right word, but ending was a little elliptical for me.
You know, I wondered, because I think I was expecting this to be more than just a 2-issue series. Issue number 1 basically sets up the story. You have a character, oh God, what is her name? She's a single mother, divorced. Her husband's really not providing the way that he's supposed to in terms of the alimony. Right. She's got a young son, and she is needing a place to live. Well, someone she worked with him. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read that first issue. Says that he has an empty house that he needs someone to live in order to help, with the upkeep while he prepares to sell it. And so she and her son move into the house, and they find out that up in the attic, and she's also an artist, up in the attic is this nefarious force. And this is where she also has gone to almost like set up a studio to do some of her own art. Mm-hmm. But there is something embedded in a painting that's already up there. And I guess the best way of describing this weird, force or monster, whatever you want to call it, it's tentacled. And when I saw the tentacles, I thought Cthulhu.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard not to think Cthulhu
exactly.
when you see tentacles in a horror story.
Yeah, so we're given. I mean, there's more to it than just the Lovecraft connection, but it's an ill-defined terror.
Right,
that's up in the attic, and it is this ill-defined terror that ends up bringing the place Elder House, thus the title, down. But there are some other ghosts that are a part of this story, and I'm thinking of the mother and son, and I think they're in a neighboring house, right?
I think so. It seemed a little unclear to me.
Well, and this underscores, something that you brought up earlier, that this is apparently a 2-issue microseries. There seems to be in this story, Elder House, the kernel of something that could be quite well developed. If the creators, Matthews and Trigo, went on to make this into, a longer miniseries or maybe even an ongoing series.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things here that seem to have been thrown in that something could have been made of them. Like, for instance, the neighbor ghosts.
Right. Yeah. I think the same story told over 4 issues, I think, might have been more satisfying.
Exactly.
Because a lot of things, if they're not necessarily glossed over, but things just tend to happen rather than kind of develop. And that was kind of my take on this, that things happen because they have to happen rather than feeling that they were necessarily organic to the story. Mm-hmm. And I just think if they had a little more space, but again, every issue costs money to create, and I know there's always kind of economic constraints on these type of things, but I think if they would have had a little more room to stretch this out a little bit, it wouldn't have been padded. It would have been more complete.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting, and like you, I think that it would have been better as a 4 or 5 issue miniseries. But it's a good idea.
Yeah, and the art is interesting. It's a little kind of sketchy and angular, but there's some interesting color stuff happening throughout it that keeps it visually interesting. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like the art in All Hallows Eve as well.
Yeah, I like that doesn't do as much for me. I like this. I think I appreciate this one a lot more visually.
As I walked out of my laboratory door, I saw the monster I created years before. You all remember that horrible face? He followed me at a deadly pace. The chills ran up and down my spine. No.
Okay, now Gene and I are going to get to the last of our Halloween seasonal comics for 2015, and we're grouping 4 different titles together, and there's a reason why we're doing this. And those titles are Grim Fairy Tales 2015 Halloween Special, Zombies vs. Cheerleaders 2015 Halloween Special, Zombie Tramp Halloween Special, and Gold Digger Halloween 2015. So now, the Grim Fairy Tale and Zombies vs. Cheerleaders are both published by Zenescope. Zombie Tramp from Action Lab. In fact, I think we discussed Zombie Tramp last year on the Halloween show. And then Gold Digger is from Antarctic Press. And one of the reasons why we're putting these 4 titles together is that of all of the comics that we're looking at this year on the Halloween show, these are the 4 that are, well, Adventure Time is as well, but these are 4 that are specifically created as Halloween specials, and they say so in their title, all 4 of them. Another reason why we're putting all 4 of these together is that these are very good examples of titles. If you don't read them already, you're going to be very, very lost. Somewhat like Adventure Time. Although to me, Adventure Time was more approachable than these other 4.
I think so, too.
Yeah. Now, I know you read the Grim Fairy Tales Halloween Special from last year. Is that the only Grim Fairy Tales comic you'd read previous to this?
Sir.
Okay. Now, see, I think about the first 2 or 3 trades I had read of Grim Fairy Tales, because when it first came out, I was fascinated to see what the creators were doing with fairy tales and how it may be different from Fables, which I, absolutely loved and currently love, even though it's ended. So, I mean, obviously, and fairly early on, Grim Fairy Tales went a very different direction from Vertigo's Fables in that, how do I put this? It was based more on cheesecake, Grim Fairy Tales.
Right.
Especially their covers. And I think that's primarily how they're known, although, from what I understand, there is a devoted reader base with the various Zenescope titles that they put out. So, there's definitely an audience for this. So I wasn't completely lost in this year's 2015 Halloween special of Grim Fairy Tale. For instance, I knew the main character, Sella Mathers, was doing the kind of things that she was doing. Other than that, though, I had no clue on who some of these other characters are, but I think these other characters are specific to this particular issue. And I don't know about you, Gene, but I read Grim Fairy Tales 2015 Halloween Special as something very much like old slasher films of the 80s.
Yeah, it definitely has that feel to it. one thing you said, you're not sure if like the characters are created just for this issue. The introduction does say that 3 entities from her past are out for vengeance and plan to teach Sela a terrifying lesson of their own.
Right, and those are those figures at the
have,
very beginning, though, that we see.
I thought they were the ones that come up at the end.
Well,
the thing the pig people and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, but we see them at the very beginning. They're like I saw them almost as the 3 weird sisters from Macbeth.
It feels like that at the start, but it feels like there's a history between her and these creatures, and I don't know what the history is, and it's not made clear.
Yeah. And see, again, this is one of those examples of a title that for their seasonal, in this case Halloween issue, it really doesn't stand on its own. It's part of an ongoing storyline, although even not having known what's going on with Sela and these 3 creatures, whoever the hell they are, I think you can get what you need to get out of this Halloween special from Grin Fairy Tales.
Yeah, it's not exactly standalone, but you get a full story from it, I suppose.
Yeah.
As far as that goes, and it is less cheesecakey than I was expecting. It's not very cheesecakey at all, to be honest. The cover is actually a riff on the poster to Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
Why, I'm not exactly sure, because it's not a fairy tale and it's not really invoked that much in the telling of the story itself, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I guess it's fine for what it is. It's not really my cup of tea necessarily, but it's not as kind of as egregiously cheesecakey as I would have thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Now, a little more egregiously cheesecakey is the other Zenescope Halloween title, Zombies vs. Cheerleaders. And we also talked about Zombies vs. Cheerleaders last Halloween.
I believe we did, yes.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to pull that up here.
And, I do not read Zombies versus Cheerleaders. But again, this is one of those issues that I feel like I'm missing something by not knowing the previous series. But then again, a lot of these stories, and this is one of those, anthology issues, so it's made up of a lot of individual stories by different creators. They seem to stand alone. But again, I'm not familiar with the world of the cheerleaders and them fighting zombies. But apparently that is part of the joke that runs throughout all of these stories. And I think we discussed this last year. Another joke that runs through most, if not all, but I think most of these stories, is their kind of metafictional self-awareness. The characters will point out that their creators have put them in these scenarios, and so that's why they're in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not sure, because like in every story, the cheerleaders, again, and there's a clear death to Buffy the Vampire Slayer here, which is not followed through in any real thematic sense, but every cheerleader seems to come from a different school. I'm not sure that these are continuing characters at all. It just, to me, what this feels like is that here's a bunch of stories about just cheerleaders from wherever fighting zombies from wherever, and that's kind of all you need to know, because that's everyone. Every uniform is different. The characters don't seem to be continuing from one story to the other. Not that there's a lot of character to follow necessarily, but everyone seems different. So I'm not sure that if there's an overarching narrative, I couldn't guess it from this. It just seems like here's another way to talk about cheerleaders and zombies.
Yeah, exactly. And to attempt to have fun doing it. Now, I say attempt to have fun. I don't necessarily find this fun. Again, like you, it's not my cup of tea, but, different strokes, so to speak. I don't know if that's the best choice of words given this comic. And I think a great example of the kind of fun that some people will find in Zombies versus Cheerleaders, this Halloween special and otherwise. And this is a story that comes about the middle of the issue. And, of course, it's a one-page story. And, of course, it has cheerleaders taking a shower together. And strategically, soap suds are covering certain parts of their anatomy. And, as the 3 women are showering together, one's shampooing her hair and says, "I just love showering with you girls after an exhausting cheer practice." And then her friend says, "Really? I think the perv writer made you say that. No one says that in real life." And then the other one mentions something about, "Oh, shut up," and loofah my back. And then at one point they're bathing together, and one looks at the reader, and she's her breasts are bare, but she's holding up her hands to where you don't see any nipple, and she looks at the reader and says, hello, focus. Okay, so that's the kind of humor, right? It is, very sexualized humor with a wink to the reader. It's like, oh, we know what we're doing. We're having fun doing this. We know that this is nothing more than vapid entertainment of these, scantily clad cheerleaders fighting zombies, which is what you like anyhow.
Right. Although there was one story that actually felt was kind of not terrible, was actually kind of interesting. It was the one right before that, Field of Zombies. It's one
yes.
It kind of looks like its original artwork. It's black and white line work on kind of like a how would you say it? It looks almost like it's drawn on parchment. It's not drawn on parchment, but it looks like it's drawn on parchment.
Right.
And so it's kind of a monochrome until you get to the zombies. It's a 6-page story, and then once you get to the zombies, the blood is black ink, but also a lot of red ink splattered all over the place. And the story itself, I mean, the cheerleader character is well endowed, but it's not really the focus of the story like it is in so many of the other stories in the book. It's kind of a not bad short zombie story, and I like the artwork a lot. This is written by who's it? Written by Heather Finley and artwork by Bill Mouse.
Right. So yeah, I agree. This is the one story in this issue that stands out for me.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't have to be in a book called Zombies versus Cheerleaders.
Right.
It's a nice little story with a little twist at the end, and the artwork, even the blood splatter artwork, kind of goes off the side of the page at the end. Like you said, the kind of the metafictional awareness of itself, but in a different sort of way, not in a wink wink, hey, this is sexy sort of way. In a this story looks like it's a happy ending, but it's not sort of way. It's a very different thing than pretty much anything else in the book, I thought.
Yeah. Now, another one of these 4 issues, the seasonal releases, is Zombie Tramp Halloween Special from Action Lab, and this is created by Dan Mendoza. And this is another one that we discussed last Halloween, if I'm not mistaken. Zombie
It could
Tramp.
be. I don't remember it at all.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to stay positive here. I don't know what to say about the Zombie Tramp Halloween Special from this year. I think there's more of an attempt at story than there was in last year's Halloween Special, Zombie Tramp. I'm not sure if there's much story, because basically you have the main character is this tramp whose name is Janie Bell, who is now a zombie. And, well, that's all you need to know about the title, Zombie Tramp. But in this particular issue, there is a young woman named Maisie who is, I think, in danger from an evil spirit.
Right.
And the evil spirit has previously killed both Maisie's mother and sister. And so the ghost of the sister comes to Janie Bell, the zombie tramp, and says, you must help my sister. Now, why she comes to the zombie tramp for help, I don't know. But, okay, just go with it. So then Janie Bell, the zombie tramp, turns into a non-zombie looking character. In other words, she's able, apparently, I didn't know this from last year's issue, she's able to transform her body to where she doesn't look like she's being eaten away as a zombie would. And so she looks rather, vivacious and alive. And so she helps Maisie escape this evil spirit.
Right. And the ending, I mean, after your some crazy zombie monster action, the ending just kind of, to me, it just felt like it came out of nowhere. It's not a Deus Ex Machina, it's a rip horn off head Ex Machina or something like that. It's just bizarre. Suddenly everything is fine at the end. It doesn't really earn the ending necessarily, no. But I mean, there is a narrative here. There's more narrative than there was in almost any of the other, like the Zombies versus Cheerleader stories, for example.
Right.
And it's trying to draw on some sort of mythology, and there's something with like the blood of this family is important somehow. It's got some kind of like interesting horror tropes, but it just doesn't really pull them off very interestingly, I thought.
Right, and even you were mentioning the ending. I mean, the way that it ends here, and I don't think this is a kind of spoiler, but It's because we're not talking about what happens in terms of the action, but where Janie Bell and Maisie end up. I mean, Maisie likes Janie Bell, and she, wants to know more about her. But Janie Bell she's a loner. She's standoffish, and so she says that she needs to be on her own. She can't be connected to anyone. And so, in the very last panel of this issue, we see her walking down a desolate highway by herself. She's. Shane walking away at the very end.
She's Shane. She's a Ronin. She's Mad Max.
Exactly. She's on her own. But you're right. There is story here, but there's also quite a bit of zombie TNA.
Yeah.
Cartoony zombie TNA, but.
Right. Yeah. It's again not really my cup of tea, but not. I've read worse. Let's put it that way.
Right. Okay. Which may bring us to the last issue that we're going to be discussing on this Halloween episode, and this is from Antarctic Press, Gold Digger Halloween. Now, the thing about Gold Digger, I haven't read Gold Digger. I'm aware of Gold Digger. Or have you read any Gold Digger comics in the past?
I know that it exists.
Yeah, and really, this is one of the oldest creator-owned titles still being published today, Gold Digger. So it does have a long and involved legacy. I mean, beginning from, at least the early 1990s. This, though, I'm unfamiliar with Gold Digger. This issue, I guess because it's a Halloween issue, is made up of individual stories. I think there are 4 short stories and 2 pinups. And all of them are by different creators. Now, the original creator of Gold Digger, Fred Perry, did that first story, Peeboos in Disguise. Of all the one, now we've talked about some of these other titles that you and I weren't familiar with. For you it was Adventure Time. For both of us it was Zombie versus Cheerleaders. I felt completely lost in Gold Digger Halloween.
Yeah, this. I think I told you before. I am so not the target audience for this book. The target audience for this book is clearly people who have read it before. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't make any pretense at all of letting you know who these characters are necessarily. They're here and they're doing things. And again, the first one is all like doing Halloween costumes, and it's Transformers riff. And again, I've never seen an episode of Transformers or any of the movies or read any of the comic books. I'm a bad nerd, so I have no clue. I know it's a bunch of people having a bunch of characters having fun, and I get that, and I don't really get anything else.
Exactly. In the second story, the first story, okay, I think that the one that Fred Perry did, it mm-hmm. seems to be the best drawn of the collection. I still don't know what's going on, and I really don't know what's going on in the second one. So it involves apparently 2 standard characters in the Gold Digger universe, Gina and Brittany, and one is a cheetah. I couldn't tell you which one was. Now, if we have any Gold Digger fans who are listening to this, who are getting really upset that you and I seem to be, if not ignorant, then perhaps even dissing Gold Diggers, then they can, get in touch with us and let us know. But I'm completely clueless here. I don't know which one is the cheetah chick. I don't know.
The cheetah one's with the spots, obviously.
Right, but is that Gina or Brittany? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, and it's to the point that they don't give me a reason to care. Because, again, this is not written for you or for me. This is written for those who are avid readers of Gold Digger. And so this brings us back to that earlier question that we were addressing, and that is, what could be the responsibility of a seasonal special issue? Should it stand out in a way that it is a self-contained, understandable narrative of its own, or a collection of stories of its own, where you don't need any previous knowledge of the title in order to perhaps catch new readers? Or should it be part of some ongoing storyline within the title that is a reward for their regular readers?
Right, yeah, and this definitely feels like the reward for the regular readers. It's the 11th Halloween special, no less. So that should tell you something that we're coming into the middle of something as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was hard to understand who the characters were and what their relationships were again, and why I need to care about them so much.
Well, Gene, you and I have covered a lot of territory on this episode. We started off with 3 books, Haunted Horror, Pre-Code Comics, So Good They're Scary, Upside Down, A Hatful of Spells, and then Monster Junkies, An American Family Odyssey. From there, we moved on to The Goon Theater Bazaar, Adventure Time 2015 Spooktacular, SpongeBob Comics number 49. Then we looked at 215 Inc. titles, All Hallows Eve number 5 and Elder House number 2. And then we wrapped up with 4 titles, all seasonal, that kind of confused us for the most part. And that is that's the best way of putting it, I think. Grim Fairy Tales 2015 Halloween Special, Zombie Tramp Halloween Special, Zombies vs. Cheerleaders 2015 Halloween Special, and Gold Digger Halloween.
That's a lot of comics. I've read so many Halloween comics this past week. It's scary.
Is it kind of like ODing on candy?
It's a little bit, yeah. Yeah, although I've been reading some other in my downtime. I've been reading other Halloween comics as well. I picked up some haunted love romance comics from the 1970s a couple weekends ago in St. Louis. I've got a lot of the Halloween around me.
Wow. Well, we had a good time reading these comics, and if you want to have a good time reading them as well, then you can visit the website of our sponsor, and our sponsor is Discount Comic Book Service. So if you go to dcbservice.com, you're going to find a lot of good savings, and in fact, right now, if you go there, you can find some of the titles that we discussed today. For example, if you look for Haunted Horror, you're going to find Volume 3, Pre-Code Comics So Good They're Scary, at 35% off the cover price. So instead of paying full price, you pay only $16.24. But you can also find volumes 1 and 2 of the hardbound Haunted Horror, both at 35% off the cover price. Also, if you go to the website of their sister company, which is InStockTrades.com, you can find some of these other books that we discussed. For instance, Upside Down, the graphic novel, is at 30% off cover price. So instead of paying $14.99, you pay only $10.49. Hey, and you could even find the first Upside Down, a vampire tale that came out several years ago, at 70% off cover price. So you don't pay $9.95. You pay only $2.98.
Wow.
So get those deals for you and your kids this Halloween season. And after you do get those books or you read other scary titles, get in touch with us and let us know what you've been reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find on the right-hand side of your browser window a tab that says Send a Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can leave us an audio message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or if you're back in the 1990s, you can email us. Our email address is 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me at gene@comicsalternative.com.
And if you want to reach me directly, I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs. We're also elsewhere in the social media realm, such as on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Pinterest. We even have a YouTube channel, so you can check out the show that way. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And you can find, as always, every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at the website, comicsalternative.com.
Comics Alternative, we're taking over all your internets.
That's right. It's kind of like the Outer Limits. We have control of your television. We have control of your social media. And that's in keeping with the Halloween season.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are Legion.
That's right.
We contain multitudes.
Well, Gene, I hope you have a fun Halloween.
You too.
And we hope you do too, listeners. Until next year's Halloween episode, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
We'll see you later.
Have a spooky Halloween.